Hello, I'm Esther Gitu. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up.
The White House says it's close to a Gaza ceasefire deal, even as questions linger on whether a future U.S. administration will inherit the problem of managing tensions in the Middle East. Emergency responders in Sudan scramble to determine the number of people still missing after the collapse of the Arbaat Dam. And a young, tech-hungry population is driving the growth of Tanzania's tech hub thanks to a supportive government that is fostering the rapid growth of startups. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54.
White House officials are welcoming the rescue of an Israeli hostage held by Hamas and say they are finalizing a Gaza ceasefire deal. But even if an agreement is reached, a future U.S. administration will still inherit the problem of managing tensions in the Middle East. White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara looks at potential U.S. policy under Vice President Kamala Harris should she win the November presidential election.
Another deadly Israeli strike on another refugee camp in Gaza as negotiators strive to reach a ceasefire deal in return for the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. One of them was rescued on Tuesday.
ברוך שובך הביתה, פרחן קאדי. אני מברך את צה"ל והשב"כ על עוד מבצע שחרור מוצלח. אנחנו פועלים ללא לאות להחזיר את כל חטופינו. אנחנו עושים זאת בשתי דרכים מרכזיות.
That's a message Vice President Kamala Harris also underscored as she accepted her nomination as the Democratic Party's presidential nominee last week.
President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Outside of her term as vice president, Harris has no foreign policy background. Her national security advisor is Philip Gordon, who served under Democratic presidents including Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, as well as Joe Biden.
End this war.
This signals a continuity with past Democratic administrations, including on military support for Israel, something her former national security advisor reaffirms.
The vice president and the president have supported U.S. military assistance to Israel, not just per the existing agreement that we have with Israel, but also an increase this year because of their security needs.
This despite demands from Arab and Muslim Americans, as well as progressive and young Democrats, for an embargo on arms sales to Israel. At the same time, Harris has expressed more sympathy towards Palestinian suffering than Biden has.
We can't learn a lot from what she says, because what she says now is directed to winning an election and to keeping the Democratic Party together. And since the Democratic Party is divided between those who are more sympathetic to Israel and those who are more sympathetic to the Palestinians about evenly, she has to say basically platitudes. And that's what she's done.
Compared to Biden, who often underscores he is a Zionist, Harris, the daughter of immigrants from Jamaica and India, may be more cognizant of views from the global South.
She is aware of how the rest of the world may feel about the Middle East, about neocolonialism, neo-imperialism. And I really hope that she has the opportunity to bring those experiences to bear if she becomes the president, because that is the reality of what U.S. foreign policy needs to confront the challenges ahead, which are very different from the challenges of the past 3 decades.
Should she win in November, Harris will inherit the challenges of her predecessors, including a protracted conflict in the Middle East. She will need to formulate her own foreign policy, free Palestine! A high-stakes, complex affair that juggles multiple interests. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
In a major operation in the occupied territories, Israeli strikes in the West Bank killed at least 9 people on Wednesday, according to Palestinian health authorities. The 9 were killed in different areas in Jenin and near Tubas. Clashes with the Israeli military in the West Bank have risen sharply since the start of the Israeli-Hamas war in Gaza, as Israel steps up operations against armed militant groups, including Iranian-backed Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Officials from the U.S., Qatar and Egypt are leading efforts to broker a ceasefire that are likely to include a halt in fighting, the release of hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza, the return of Palestinian prisoners from Israel, and a surge of humanitarian aid for civilians in Gaza. For more on the Israel-Hamas war, I'm joined live from Athens, Greece by Bill van Esveld. He is the Associate Director for the Middle East and North Africa at the Human Rights Watch. Bill, this war has gone on for a long time. Give us a brief overview of what is happening on the ground.
Thanks so much. It's great to be on your program. What's happening on the ground is really an unprecedented catastrophe from the point of view of the humanitarian situation in the West Bank and in Gaza. Your preview just mentioned the West Bank, and it's been the deadliest year in the West Bank since the United Nations started keeping records, about 20 years ago. We've seen more, in addition to deaths and injuries, we've seen more building destructions, displacement of Palestinians, and takeovers of Palestinian land by settlers and settlements. All of that is the worst on record, but it pales in comparison to what we're seeing in Gaza, where already 40,000 people have been killed, about 94,000 have been wounded, and those figures are almost certainly undercounts because the healthcare and health tracking system has been dismantled. So we don't really know how many people are dying of disease. They can't keep the records. In addition to that human toll, we don't know how many people are buried under the rubble. And the rubble is everywhere. 60% or more of every single structure in Gaza is damaged now or completely destroyed. And then when you think of what people are going through, Gaza had a little more than 2 million people before the start of this conflict. Mm-hmm. Almost every single one of them has been displaced now, many up to 10 times. And about 89% of the territory of Gaza is under Israeli military evacuation orders. So all of these people are increasingly crammed into a tiny space where there isn't water access, there isn't electricity, there isn't food, there isn't medical care. So it's a really catastrophic situation.
Yeah, Bill, now we're also hearing of reports of polio outbreak in Gaza, where some UN agencies are actually operating from a humanitarian point of view. What changes if a ceasefire deal is reached?
Yeah, basically every single major humanitarian organization has called for a ceasefire because they want to be able to vaccinate about 640,000 children in the Gaza Strip, which has just seen the first recorded polio cases in 25 years. The reason that outbreak is happening, and I should say it's not just polio. I mean, we're talking to doctors who say everybody in Gaza has diarrhea now. Hepatitis A is spreading. Other waterborne diseases are spreading. And the reason is that there's just no clean water access. The water, people have been surviving on as little as 2 liters of water per day. And this conflict has been going on for 10 months. They've been displaced many times, as I said. So with no clean water, also the sewage treatment facilities are offline because they don't have electricity or the fuel needed to run the backup generators when there's no electricity. So you've just got basically a public health disaster that may have reached the tipping point already.
On top of that, how would you sum up what you have seen this war do to both Israel and Gaza?
I mean, Palestine is really... it's a shambles. The West Bank is on the run from settler attacks, and Gaza has been largely reduced to rubble. The situation in Israel since October 7th, many people lost family members, people we're talking to, traumatized. There's mass displacement as well on the Israeli side from the northern border and the Gaza envelope. And there's other issues going on with Israel as well. You've got the ongoing International Criminal Court case, which is considering arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant. You've got 2 cases at the International Court of Justice. One just issued an advisory opinion saying the occupation is unlawful. all the settlements should be dismantled. Another is being led by South Africa on charges of genocide. So this is really it's an unprecedented situation for both countries.
Bill, many thanks for your insight into what's happening in Israel and also in Palestine. Bill van Esveld is an Associate Director of the Middle East and North Africa at Human Rights Watch. The United Nations is calling the situation in Sudan the largest displacement crisis in the world. The head of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee told VOA's Carol Van Dam about the plight of the Sudanese people and what the U.S. is doing to try to end the war.
Thanks for mentioning Sudan. I mention it all the time. It is a huge crisis. We don't want Darfur. We remember that from our earlier days. So we have to keep the focus on it. We're keeping the focus on it. I know that Vice President Harris is fully engaged on what's happening in Sudan. America's going to do everything we can. We're pleased that there now seems to be some peace discussions taking place. We hope that will become real, and we hope that the countries, particularly countries we have relations with, will recognize that they need to back off and make sure that there's a real process for peace.
That was U.S. Senator Ben Cardin speaking with VOA's Carol Van Dam. Survivors of a flood following a dam breach in eastern Sudan are appealing for assistance from their local government to rescue the hundreds of people who remain missing. Emergency responders are scrambling to determine the number of people still missing after the collapse of the Arbaat Dam in Red Sea State on Sunday. VOA's Philip Alexiou reports.
Representatives of international organizations visited the area Tuesday of Sudan's collapsed Arbaat Dam to assess damage at the less affected side of the dam in eastern Sudan, which collapsed earlier this week due to heavy flooding. But the team struggled to reach the other side as roads were closed. Emergency responders were scrambling on Tuesday to find out how many people remain missing after waters burst through the dam, resulting in the worst in a series of floods that have devastated a country already torn by 500 days of war.
Arbaat is known for the dam providing water to the entire Red Sea state, and may God help us to serve the citizens of the Red Sea state. We delivered humanitarian assistance from the first day of the floods, and it shall continue until God saves the people. Today, while preparing our reports with the people, we knew that people have lost their homes, farms, cattle, and everything.
The governor of the Red Sea state, Mustafa Mohammed Noor, was thankful to God that 171 citizens have been saved and said work will continue to save more people. One survivor of Arbaat is resident Mohammed Sharif.
We have a missing body that we could not find for 4 days. And we have families who are struggling to deliver food to on the other side of the collapsed dam. There are dead bodies that were swept away by floods. We cannot reach the Red Crescent or any organization to go to the affected area on the other side. We cannot do anything.
30 people have died as a result of the dam breach, and it's likely there will be more victims to be found. War-shattered Sudan is already suffering from the world's largest hunger and displacement crisis, and the flooding has impeded aid delivery already disrupted by the conflict between the army and its rival, the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Philip Alexiou, VOA News.
Pope Francis on Wednesday strongly decried the treatment of migrants crossing the Mediterranean Sea to enter Europe, saying it was a, quote, grave sin not to offer aid to migrant vessels. During his weekly general audience in St. Peter's Square, the pontiff called for expanding access routes for migrants and a global governance of migration based on justice, brotherhood, and solidarity.
In quei mari, in quei deserti mortali,
in those deadly seas and deserts, today's migrants should not be there, but unfortunately, they are. But it's not through more restrictive laws. It is not through militarization of borders. It is not through rejections that we will achieve this. Instead, we will achieve it by expanding safe and legal entry routes for migrants, by facilitating refuge for those fleeing wars, violence, persecution, and so many calamities.
Migrants crossing the Mediterranean Sea in simple crafts or homemade boats from northern Africa and the Middle East have been the subject of intense debate across Europe over the past decade. 75 years after the ratification of the Geneva Conventions, a former child soldier turned foreign minister of Sierra Leone urged more international support for the key accords, highlighting the importance in rehabilitating him and tens of thousands of his fellow compatriots following the country's bitter civil war. VOA Pondiho has more.
75 years after the ratification of the Geneva Convention, former child soldier and current foreign minister of Sierra Leone, Musa Timothy Kaba, shared his personal experience with the conventions and emphasized the vital role the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, played in his rehabilitation and reintegration into the community.
I stand here today as a former child soldier, forcefully recruited during the civil conflict that decimated over 50,000 of my compatriots. I need not dwell upon the trauma of those years, but I do need to acknowledge here today in this birthplace of modern global humanitarianism that it was the ICRC which profoundly helped me to overcome through several interventions, both physical, practical, and psychological, from the trauma of my war experience and to be reabsorbed in normal society.
The permanent representative of Mozambique to the UN, Pedro Comissário Afonso, also praised the conventions as a moral beacon and legal compass during and after armed conflicts in the history of his country.
They guided the actions not only of the parties involved in conflict, but also of the humanitarian organizations that worked tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of the Mozambican people.
Tatiana Valovoya, the Director General of UN Geneva, highlighted the enduring importance of the conventions, emphasizing the need to adhere to international humanitarian law even in the face of violations.
Today, it's really very, very important once again to understand that even if the conventions are violated, nevertheless, they are so important because they allow us to remind everybody that the wars have rules, even the wars have limits, and we really have to stick to the international law, to the international humanitarian law, and we have to develop this law.
Against over 120 ongoing armed conflicts globally, this commemoration underscores the importance of multilateralism and adherence to international law in preventing and resolving disputes. It serves as an emotional reminder of the ongoing need for global support to uphold the critical accords of the Geneva Conventions and protect the rights of individuals affected by armed conflicts. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Still to come, young tech-hungry Tanzanians drive the growth of tech hubs. We'll be right back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, we take you to the U.S. state of Maine, where a global program brings together youth from regions that are deeply divided by conflict to help them learn to understand one another and how communities can coexist in peace despite diversity. Join me, Vincent McCory, on the next edition of Straight Talk Africa as we take you inside the seats of Peace Summer Camp and learn more about the program and how it's changing perceptions and attitudes across conflict lines.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see, We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
As technology advances and artificial intelligence continue to make breakthrough advances that benefit humanity, there are also growing concerns that it mirrors societal patriarchal structures and it could worsen the digital divide. On this week's edition of Our Voices, we will discuss the state of women in AI today, whether AI-powered services lack diverse gender perspectives, and how to ensure equitable digital future for all. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In other news, the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the continent needs 10 million doses of Mpox vaccines to prevent the spread of the disease, which it had declared a public health emergency. But experts say the global shortage of Mpox vaccines is likely to affect any inoculation drives in Africa. And women in Chad are defying discrimination and violence to assert their rights to own and control land. Traditional beliefs that women are secondary to men undermine legal efforts to ensure that women have equal rights to land. New women's collectives aim to take on these beliefs and help wives and mothers assert themselves. The Paralympic Games are underway Wednesday in Paris as over 4,000 athletes with disabilities, permanent injuries or impairments compete for more than 500 medals across 22 sports over 11 days in the French capital. Paris, which has just hosted the Olympics, again provides the backdrop for what promises to be another spectacle, with many of the same venues hosting Paralympic competitions. A young and tech-hungry population is driving the growth of Tanzania's tech hub. Over 60% of the population is under age 25, and a supportive government fosters an environment where tech startups can thrive. Here's VOA's technology correspondent Paul Ndiho.
Thanks, Esther. Tanzania has transformed from an underdog to a region's digital darling. Dar es Salaam is buzzing with innovation and startup funding is skyrocketing. Tech analysts argue that internet access is playing a considerable role. To understand more about what's driving this surge, I spoke to Norman Karamaga, the Dar es Salaam-based co-founder of Charger Africa Limited.
We've been in the tech space in Tanzania for the last 5 years, and we've seen tremendous improvements in the last few years. I'll give you an example just to be brief, is we recently participated in a technology challenge which was hosted by Total. And there were over 140 startups that have participated in this challenge alone. And that should tell you the space that we're in. So technology has not only been something that's providing something innovative into our communities, but it's looking like the only avenue for providing employment for the youth. So personally, also my co-founder, we came back from university, and this is something that we jumped straight into as soon as we graduated, because we knew about the job industry in our communities, in our country. So we straight away started into. It looked like it was like an entrepreneurship journey, but it came out of necessity of what. So not only do we see the gap and the opportunity for deploying the services that we're offering, but we had to do it. There was no other offers or any on the table for us. And that's the case for millions of university students that are graduating in Tanzania and in Africa at large.
If I hear you correctly, you seem to suggest that instead of looking for a job out there trying to line up like what most people do, you didn't want to go through that route. You decided to create your own jobs. How fascinating is that?
It was more of a necessity for both of us, that we saw the opportunity that lies in the community, in the space. However, it was not. There are not a lot of job opportunities to begin with, especially for expats. So, with that being said, it was like It was either for us to start something and give an opportunity for other youth members, just like us, or just keep waiting and hoping that someday that something will arise, and we're not going to go for that route.
When you have talked to some of your colleagues in the tech space, people who are creating employment like yourselves, what are these young people up to? What is it that they are doing that is so different from each other?
When you look into the tech space right now in Tanzania particularly, is you find there is a broad or wide range of industries that these youth are tapping into, not only into the energy field, but also into the fintech space. There are people who are into the mining space, there are people in the agriculture space, there are people in the tourism space. So especially with the economy that we're in and the vast resources that we have, so people tend to tap into those and see how we can improve not only our ways of living, but also the economy at large.
When I've talked to a lot of people, most people don't talk of Tanzania as this burgeoning place for technology. How big is the tech space there?
Well, see, I like that narrative because yes, it's been ongoing for the longest, but then you can see there are a number of startups rising from Tanzania, the likes of Ramani, the likes of Nala, who are for instance, Nala just raised $40 million about a few months ago. So there is that rapid expansion and rapid growth that's happening. Of course, we're not in the likes in comparison with South Africa, Kenya, or Nigeria, but we're in that space, and especially with the market size that we have. So the opportunity is so great, and a lot of startups have come to realize that there's plenty of space for them to tap into and to grow. And because of the vast number of opportunities and support that's coming along, so people have the audacity and the courage to actually explore and see what kind of ventures they can jump into.
And how about in the school systems or at universities? Is this something that they are teaching to young people?
Yes, a lot of schools now you're seeing that they're adapting to using or at least teaching the students. I'm seeing a lot of coding classes, and I'm seeing a lot of developing classes in terms of software. So that's progress. That in itself is progress.
Karamaga, co-founder of Charger Africa Limited, based in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. That's today's report. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Paul. Be sure to join Paul Ndiho each Wednesday for another tech segment right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.